They who control the credit of a nation direct the policy of government and hold in the palm of their hands the destiny of the people. After billions upon billions have been made, money as powerful and lust after as it is, wears thin. There is little lifestyle difference between someone with 20 million and 200 million. Money can only go so far. Power becomes the new sport, and world politics is the height of that game. It is fair to say a conscious or unconscious global banking conspiracy is in existence in our midst today. Names such as Barings of England, Rothschild, JP Morgan, Warburg. International bankers such as the Rothschilds are not the same type of bankers seen on the public high street. They deal with industrial giants of the world's institutions and local and foreign governments. The international banker creates the illusion that the money is being controlled by the government, when all the while it is being controlled by them. Rockefeller owned the Chase Bank, and the Warburgs owned the Manhattan Bank. In a merger, the Chase Manhattan Bank was created. One of the most powerful conglomerates in existence, acting in consort with the Morgan banking dynasty. They spent millions of dollars to promote their campaign for legislation to gain a privatizing of US money. They sold the idea to the public on the premise that current government legislation would work to propagate monopolies. Politicians all over the country cried for a new reform. To ensure a convincing case, the financial conglomerates publicly spoke out against these new policies, while secretly promoting it from the shadows. In December 1913, a short-staffed Congress voted in what was known as the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve is privately owned with stock held by 12 private banks, beyond and above the vote of the people. The President appoints 7 members to the Federal Reserve Board for a term of 14 years each. This serves to create the illusion that the government put into power by the voters ultimately control who governs this powerful body. However, no president in American history has appointed a member that is not congenial to the financial interest of the banking dynasties. The aim of the Federal Reserve Act, in essence, was propagated under the banner of removing money from politics. Many were and are still even today unaware that the Federal Reserve is a profit-making and private-owned corporation. Its aim, like most capitalist businesses, is first and foremost to profit. All other priorities are of a secondary nature. At the genesis of the Federal Reserve Act, the United States of America was divided into 12 federal districts, for which a board of directors was appointed. Trillions of dollars were made available to governments, businesses, and people, monies lent with the pending plague of interest attached. The US government had spent more money than it had earned through taxation. The government then turned to the Federal Reserve to obtain money required to run the country. In this agreement, the government instructed the Treasury Department to print US interest-bearing bonds. From the bonds obtained from the US government, the Federal Reserve has created more and more credit, which it in turn loaned to businesses and individuals inclusive of pre-accumulated interest, establishing an ideal system whereby the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The Federal Reserve in the US serves as a line of credit when the government is in debt. The US debt currently stands at $400 billion, which incurs $20 billion in interest per annum. Interest generated from nothing. Such power, reserved for those who control the money systems, is riddled with conspiracy and greed. Money manipulation by this one body shows how the influence and control of a few can affect the majority. Company plans, political prospects, rise and fall of certain industry, boom and depression, all controlled by the few. All controlled by money. The first Federal Reserve Board members were handpicked by Colonel Edward Mandell House, who represented British and American banking interest. Edward House in 1912 wrote a supposed fiction novel entitled Philip Drew Administrator, The novel tells how a small group of insiders created a depression, then bring about the election of a hand-picked leader who launches a program called New Era. The insiders weaken the country to the point of civil war, which provides the excuse for the implementation of dictatorship policies. People, desperately looking for a way out, accept with open arms their new oppressor. This story seems very likening to actual US historical events. Edward House selected Woodrow Wilson as a presidential candidate, and when Woodrow Wilson became nominated, he later became his financial advisor. Woodrow depended on him exclusively. He even admitted that House was his alter ego. The link between money and politics and ultimately the day-to-day lives of people is inseparable. In this complex chain, the simple conclusion is clear. He who controls the money controls the people. A global system influences the people who rise to power. Only those that support the ultimate interest of the big money dynasties will be selected. They in turn select judges, administrators, ambassadors in a complex web that ultimately serves one master. The popular saying, "two sides of the same coin," is just what summarizes this system. Political parties change, governments change, but this global system remains intact. And it begs the question, what group then sits at the head of this international table? In 1870, John Ruskin, an Oxford lecturer, taught to a group of his students that the state must take control of a country's production headed by one man, a man who was superior to all others. And amongst his students was none other than Cecil Rhodes, the ruthless racist dictator, who imposed his surname on what is now Zimbabwe. Cecil Rhodes, through his international banking contacts, amassed riches from creating a diamond and gold monopoly in Africa. In 1891, Cecil Rhodes established a secret society to promote the darker side of John Ruskin's dreams. Dr. Quidley explains.
In this secret society, Rhodes was to be leader. Stead, Brett, Lord Esher, and Milner were to form an executive committee. Arthur Lord Balfour, Sir Harry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, Albert Lord Grey, and others were listed as potential members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers, later organized by Milner as the Round Table Organization.
After the death of Cecil Rhodes, the leadership of this inner circle fell into the hands of Lord Alfred Milner, High Commissioner of South Africa. As director of numerous public banks and corporate precursor of England's Midland Bank, he became one of the greatest financial and political powers in the world. He recruited many Oxford graduates into his inner circle. Dr. Quidley explains.
Through his influence, these men were able to win influential posts in government and international finance, and became the dominant influence in British imperial and foreign affairs up to 1939. Under Milner in South Africa, they were known as Milner's Kindergarten until 1910. In 1909 to 1913, they organized semi-secret groups known as Round Table groups in the chief British dependencies and in the United States.
The Round Table preempted a secondary group in the United States called the CFR, the Council for Foreign Relations. It is through such organizations, universities, and tax-exempt groups that the global capitalist conspiracy has dominated and kept a grip on the world for over 50 years. The CFR was a front for financial giants such as J.P. Morgan, who ran it with the small but elusive American Round Table Group. The CFR has an elite membership of 1,400. They are sworn to secrecy, and the organization as a whole keeps a very low profile. One of the members, Joseph Kraft, in an article, Schools for Statesmen, published in Harper's Magazine 1958, stated one of the chief architects was Colonel Mandell House. He also stated that members of the CFR included the chairman of Atomic Industry, head of the CIA, members of the largest Wall Street giants, university lecturers, journalists from CBS, NBC, Newsweek, Times Magazine, Washington Post, directors from the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment Fund, Presidents Hoover, Johnson, and Nixon. From media to presidents, the CFR has a very intimidating membership of some of the world's most powerful individuals for an organization the public knows next to nothing about. The question, so often asked, must once be asked again. What is the CFR? You can change the name, but the reality remains the same. Lodge, secret society, international bankers, Illuminati, it all equals one thing: control of public opinion and the elimination of religion. As intelligent as a person is, everything that is known is from the world around. By controlling the source of knowledge, i.e. universities, magazines, television, radio, music, etc., it is possible to fashion an organic robot which bows to the commands of its master. Some people believe that conspiracy is non-existent, and others believe everything is a conspiracy. Sometimes, the conspirators strangely encourage conspiracy. Through propaganda wars, the media conglomerates create enemies. Once it was Russia and communism, which dominated the post-World War II era, but now with the fall of communism, the new enemy is the so-called Muslim fanatic. Propaganda paints a conspiracy against religious bodies, causing the masses to react adversely to religion at the mere whisper of the word. The aim is to distance creation from the Creator and adopt God's role. The target of the negative propaganda has changed throughout the years, but the method of injecting this poison into the masses has not changed one bit. The creation of an enemy, real or illusionary, has been supported by the people who seem to have the most to lose, as mentioned before. The British banker that financed Trotsky, the communist revolution in Russia, was Lord Alfred Milner. The CFR has funded many left-wing idealists. Why? Lord House's fictional work, depicting how by creating an illusionary enemy can bring about the control of a people by only offering solutions, which result in the desired outcome of the conspirators. The people see the proposed solution as a reasonable price to pay for the restoration of tranquility. Fear can create many things, and it is in this fear that some people make billions. It must be stated that a one-world government or a one-world economy is not flawed in its puritanical realm. It becomes tainted when the question of who runs it and why is asked. A world government based on the laws of God would be a perfect world to live in. What could be better? A system where morality and fairness remain unaltered by time. However, the pursuers of the global currency and global government are not the God-fearing kind, and it is this one factor that makes all the difference. They incited fear into the nations of the world. Fear created from an illusionary villain, intimidation. A common enemy needs a common reason for unification. They want no resistance to absolute control and economic growth, and political steering of member states. Yes, America can give the world peace, but it is a piece of the expansion of the invisible American dictatorship. America has expanded its control beyond its borders. Anyone who opposes is propagated as an enemy of peace and equality. It has been a tool for the assimilation and manipulation of the resources of the world. America has no enemy. They have set up a climate favoring the World Bank and its policies and puppet governments. In 1944, at the international conference held in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the IMF was born. Conceived from the ruins of a post-war Europe, the World Bank has created a vast web of exploitation and intrigue. Its victims, none other than potentially its greatest rivals, the so-called Third World countries. 800 delegates attended the Bretton Woods Conference at the invitation of the then President of the United States, F.D. Roosevelt. And it was at this conference, to a delegation still riddled by the ensuing wars, that America made its intentions clear. Free trade with no discrimination against U.S. goods. A favorable climate for American investment in foreign economies. And unimpeded access to raw materials. F.D. Roosevelt sold his policy on the back of the chimera that only free trade could guarantee post-war peace. Free trade equals equality. Equality equals peace. He argued that the 1930s Great Depression had allowed fascism to reign and that the currency disorders had destroyed the basis for international trade and investment. Bewilderment and bitterness had become the breeders of fascism, and fascism had led to a war America had to end. In 1960, the International Development Association, the IDA, was established. Its aim was to provide interest-free loans to the world's poorest countries, unable to afford the IBRD's terms of agreement. These loans gave an impression of being lenient. They are not. It is these loans from the IDA which are responsible for the present debt burden of today's poorest countries. Mexico, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey, China, Philippines, Argentina, Korea, Colombia, Morocco and Nigeria all still struggle under their financial burden that repayment of the IDA loans have created on their economies. Their peoples live lives of misery and squalor, and yet no one stands accountable. Hiding behind the mask of national reconstruction, it is the World Bank's intention to force third world countries into submission and render them financially handicapped and politically weakened. And it is to Robert Strange McNamara, President of the World Bank, from April 1, 1968 to June 30, 1981, that credit is given. He masterminded the plot, which was to make the World Bank the most powerful establishment in the world. His previous role as United States Defense Secretary gave him first-hand knowledge of world systems and how they might be manipulated and controlled. It was he who introduced the concept of the World Bank's moral obligation to relieve world poverty. McNamara's motives were undoubtedly political. Behind the zealous, crusading front, McNamara was calculating and scheming. He wore the hat of political activist as a means to an end. And it was in this crusading disguise that the World Bank began its strategic domination of the poorer nations of the world. Third world countries were recklessly bombarded with IDA loans. The borrowing governments rarely refused a loan or worried about their position to repay it. To the investors, World Bank involvement signaled to the rest of the world that they had nothing to fear. It had become a necessary seal of approval. McNamara's final legacy had far more sinister consequences. His parting gift was the era of structural adjustment, known as policy-based lending. These loans came with inescapable conditions, insensitive to the individual and cultural needs of the countries involved. Conditions which possessed the ambition of transforming entire societies, setting a new set of westernized social goals. Programs that have since devastated the lives of millions of people, whilst making the World Bank very rich indeed. McNamara's prime concern was in fact to obtain a state of general stability for himself and his country. His solution to the dreaded communist threat was not to eradicate poverty, as he pretended, but to bring poorer nations under his control. It was not his intention to create conditions for economic and social progress in the lesser developed areas of the world, but in fact to create a system so entangled and indebted to America as to remove any threat of political rebellion. By fueling the irrationality and self-destructiveness of unbridled emotion, greed, aggressiveness, hatred, ignorance, and inertia, the World Bank has brought many, if not all, third world countries to submission. Order, stability, and security for the North has been obtained through elimination of any political, financial, or social opposition. Although McNamara left the bank more than a decade ago, his policies hauntingly remain. In 1979, the World Bank launched its carefully devised lending systems in the form of structural adjustment loans and pectoral adjustment loans. These loans tap into the very core of a country's political and financial infrastructure and spread like a disease to its peoples. The main incentive of the bank's loans is to liberalize the rules and regulations of a country in a direction favorable to America and Americans. With 4 types of loans and the capacity to coordinate them strategically, the World Bank controls many aspects of investments, institutional development, and public policy in nearly 150 nations. High African officials say TINA, short for "there is no other alternative," a vicious web of catch-22s from which there is no return. The World Bank has to be held accountable. And yet the bank continues unopposed, preaching market theology and avoiding the consequences of those misreadings. The bank wins, whatever the final outcome. The quest for money has led to an insatiable greed on the part of many large industries and businesses. Millions are spent on learning behavioral patterns of people to predict spending patterns and trends. Psychologists, economists, and marketing specialists are constantly employed by major corporations to typecast and analyze to the point where people are just numbers and points on a graph in obscure computer programs. The data is crunched in complex algorithms and program queries with one intention: predicting and controlling others. This information allows analysts to market products with such precision as to be able to predict consumers' response with almost assured success. This technique has been so refined that sales predictions are almost 100% accurate. Loyalty cards are an effective tool used to monitor general consumer habits. "Do you have a loyalty card?" is often the first utterance to greet customers at checkout points. Loyalty cards often bear the name of the store. Sainsbury's Card and Shell Card are but 2 of thousands in the UK alone. They all work on a similar basis. The more money you spend, the more points you accumulate. At specific point levels, you're entitled to gifts or cashback. On the surface, the name loyalty card guarantees just that: customer loyalty. It is in the consumer's interest to stay with one store or chain and accumulate points, as cards are not transferable. There is nothing wrong with that except the agenda goes deeper. When you are given a loyalty card, you fill in all your details and the card is processed and activated in a computer database. Every purchase you make from this point on can now be monitored. How much money was spent? On what was it spent? When was it spent? How frequent? A marketing manager's dream. In addition, your every movement is monitored by security cameras within the store. This highlights which aisles attract the most people. Do you buy bread first, followed by butter? Which products are not of interest to you? How did you respond to new marketing gimmicks in the store? Your general buying decisions. All of this information is at their disposal to be analyzed and deciphered until you become as predictable as a mathematical equation. Information can then be banded together into groups of single men, women, couples, families, etc. This information can then be sold to third parties for exorbitant amounts. McDonald's, one of the world's largest fast food giants, takes marketing research to another level. It hires low Earth orbit satellite time to conduct population development surveys. This information is used in the geo-positioning of future stores. From the Islamic Holy Land to the poorest country in Africa, McDonald's has found itself a home within almost every potential money market, tapping into the resources of young and fragile economies, piping illusionary concepts of an American dream full of excess, waste, and greed. Concepts and ideas, the very nature of which ultimately destroy any country not operating at the Western economic level. To these major chains, money is their prime concern. All other issues, including the welfare of a people, are superseded, What can and what cannot make money is a very interesting subject. These days, it seems that there are very little niche ventures that are not profit-making. Even selling obscure plots of land on Mars has been done. In light of the new Martian mission, Search for Life, some real estate agents have been selling plots of Martian land. Strangely, in the US, this practice is finding clientele, and it is not even illegal. Fear and all its components is another good sales tactic. Either create a fear of someone losing something or create a fear of an event coming. The best example of this is the mysterious Millennium Bug, which failed to show up for the Millennium celebrations. Nonetheless, books were written about it, computer programmers were in demand, software came with the Y2K seal of approval. Computer consultants were running amok, and for what? For money. It is hard to estimate how much money was earned by the service cure end of the industry. Possibly billions. All on one word: fear. If ever man created anything from nothing, it is money. Economists use the term created because the modern concept of money is a non-existent artificial term. A woodsman makes a house, but the wood is from the trees. Automobiles are made by man, but all the materials involved are created by God. Man has merely reinterpreted the raw materials to suit a specific purpose. Money, once a bit of paper, is today a mere electronic cyber pulse. The value of this paper, or electronic pulse, is negligible. Yet it can be used to build a house, buy a car, a boat, or even a cup of coffee, all acquirable through the same note or electronic pulse. And so it is to nothing a value is assigned, a value whose worth we must all collectively believe in. Without this belief, money would have no value. America has grown into the wealthiest nation on earth, a society built on capitalist principles and consumerism. The whole first world bows to the calling of money. Donald Trump.
Money for me is that it really is just a scorecard. It tells you if you've done well or if you've done badly. It really is just a scorecard. Just a scorecard.
Those who own it are revered, and those that don't are scoffed. Money seems to buy respect in the capitalist jungles of the world today. Extravagant Hollywood stars display this excess beyond practical purposes to a dazzled public, while the majority of the human race suffers a sub-animal existence.
I think the show of wealth in my case really is the great buildings that I build. Trump International Hotel and Tower, Trump Tower. I own the Empire State Building. I own 40 Wall Street, which is one of the great buildings in the world. I love great buildings, and in a way that's a show of wealth, but at the same time it's something that just has made me a lot of money.
Money is worshipped as a religion in the West. The pursuit of it is an addictive one. Supply never satisfies demand. Husbands are constantly working overtime to get that extra dollar. Wives work long hours to supplement their husband's income. Children seek jobs to supplement their spending money, as they too at a very early age join the consumer assemblage. Money is that fleeting illusion, that carrot on the stick, forever pursued, yet never attained. The word money dominates Western conversation and is the silent underlying evil that gnaws away at its foundation. The world has been intentionally kept in ignorance. Ignorant people are easily controlled, easily convinced, and easily predicted. Education and knowledge make people interact with wise eyes, aware of the reality of a system intent on governing their destinies. A system that favors the robot to the enlightened. A system that detracts from the pursuit of knowledge of self, the world, and God. Money, though essential for survival, needs, like every other aspect of our lives, to be balanced. If its pursuit deadens the soul, then what we are as a people dies. Money, they say, cannot buy the things that really matter: love, happiness, friendship, a beautiful place in the hereafter. Money is of this world, and like everything of this world, it will perish.